This is Jason Anderson calling this budget presentation to order. For roll call purposes, all council members are in attendance. Do we have any public comment submitted?
I have no public comments submitted. Ms. Murphy will be back shortly. She had to step out for a moment.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone here who would like to make public comment? Last call for public comment. Seeing none, we'll move on. Budget review. Ms. Caloria, would you take over?
Sure. So hopefully you all have your budget books. So for those that are new to this process, we're going to be literally going page by page through the budget book. I'll be explaining any changes or proposals that are within each of the areas for your and any questions as we go along. If you have any questions on any of those specific areas, I'll be happy to review them and explain and go through that explanation. Jen Hawkins, our finance director, is here with me. So I will just give you a brief overview of how we got to where we're at right now. So the town department head staff began preparations of their budget submittals to me in January. We specifically target January for their budget development because they should have roughly 6 months worth of current year data, so that way they can better project their year-end estimations and look at our overall trends. Those department head budgets are submitted to me and the finance office at the end of January. I meet with all departments through the month of February and evaluate any department requests that are made. You have, throughout the document, you see 2 columns, the department's request, and that remains intact from the department's request. And then any modifications that I've made are reflective in the manager's column throughout the entire budget document. Then we receive the Board of Education's budget submittal number on March 15th, as required by charter. That's then layered into this overall budget document for your submittal that you receive, and that you're by charter required to receive the budget document prior to April 1st, and then we typically have held this budget presentation process. So I'm going to bring you to the first page on A3, which is a summary page that really does a very high-level summation of the budget numbers that we're going to go into in more detail further on. So the town operations has an increase of $1.5 million. This is really related predominantly to an increased request in the road renewal program, and also the other 2 drivers of predominant increase in this budget, in this overall budget on the town operations, is to increase the constabulary by 2 officers and an increased position for a building maintainer. As I've previously relayed to the council, we currently have only 1 building maintainer that maintains all 5 of our town side buildings, and it's challenging for 1 individual to maintain and do the level of renovation and upkeep needed for all 5. This proposal is to add a position into that process. You'll note that there's a reduction in the debt service, and that is related to the sewer. The sewer facility upgrade we had to do in this current fiscal year was considered a buy down. So because the project completed at a certain time period after the initial approval, we are only allowed to have that debt service for what's considered a full 20 years. We've gone past 1 year, so we had to do a 1-year buy down of that debt. So we had to pay 1/20th of that debt service in the current fiscal year. So you're seeing the reduction in next year. So our next year's debt service is lower. The next one, the capital projects road renewal, this ties actually into the town operations number. So I've reduced, this was the amount that was dedicated, in the current year we dedicated $600,000 of capital, of fund balance to go towards road renewal and $40,000 to go towards storm drainage study. I've reduced the request for fund balance down on the road renewal by $200,000. And that was, looked at smoothing that into the actual town operating, the town budget, as opposed to reliance on fund balance. So you'll also note that when we get into the general fund contribution, a couple of lines below that, that's the revenue side of it. The town had also included the utilization of $910,000 for general fund contribution to offset operating costs. So if you were to take that where it says less general fund contribution on that line, and you would add it to the amount that is reflected of the same line under education, allocated general fund contribution, there, that line shows $663,000. If you were to combine those together, you get $1,550,000. $600,000 is the road renewal, $40,000 is the storm drainage, $910,000 was used to offset operating expenses. The budget you have before you proposes no utilization of fund balance to offset operating costs. And we'll see that more clearly when we get into the revenue pages. But this is just the high-level overview. So this also reflects on the education appropriations. The request that was submitted, the approved budget submittal by the Board of Education, and their reflective revenues that they reflected within their document. All of the revenues that are attributable to state grants, we utilize the revenue numbers that we receive directly from the state. That comes from the governor's proposed budget. So the budget you have before you for proposed budget has a mill rate of 26.13, which is a 0.99 mill rate increase. So I'm actually going to move all the way to the green pages at this point. Does anybody have any questions about this high-level overview? Yep.
Yeah, I do. So we reduced the capital projects down $200,000, and you put it into basically the government general.
Mm-hmm. That's one component.
Right. Okay. So my question is that why would we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Would that money, that $200,000, be available for other things other than road improvements?
Mm-hmm. So, great question. So the town we made the effort to start to increase the amount of funding for road renewal in the current fiscal year, and that was activating fund balance because of the constraints or concerns around impact from COVID on the mill rate, on the townspeople's ability to pay. So in a long-term planning method, when we are looking at the long-term investment of that road renewal, which needs to be a yearly investment, it's not just a one-time investment. Based on the street scan that we did in 2018, we were given the number in order to just maintain our existing road grades, which is currently at a D-rated level. The town would be looking to invest about $1.2 million annually into road renewal. And the town has been investing about $500,000. So that bump of $600,000 coming out of fund balance, the intent was to, over time, smooth that into the operating costs, so that so the reason for doing that is when you go for your debt service, when we're going to borrow money and we have to get a credit rating, the credit rating agencies look at how much we're utilizing our fund balance to offset general operating costs or continual non-one-time investment costs, right? And by showing a long-term plan to smooth that into the general operating structure of the town, it demonstrates to the credit rating agencies that we have a long-term plan that's sustainable for funding that. So the $200,000 would be available to use. I'm actually going to have you go to, if you go to page A8, that's the outline of the fund balance analysis. So you'll see in the current fiscal year where we allocated for budget operations, the 910, we allocated the 640. So we anticipate a fund balance for the current fiscal year of 14.7 million, which is 22.8% of operating expenditures. The budget you have before you for this upcoming fiscal year is reflecting the use of only 450,000. So the town council does have, so the recommendation around fund balance is to maintain roughly 2 months of operating expenditures, or the equivalent of between 18 to 22% of your expenditures. That gives the town council an opportunity, and I left this as a town council purview item to determine if the council wants to activate the use of fund balance in offsetting either additional road renewal costs and lowering that back out of the mill rate, or activating it to offset general operating. So you do have availability within your fund balance to decide that you want to activate some of that. But what I wanted to put before the town council was, what does the budget look like without utilizing a substantial portion of, or an investment in fund balance similar to what you did in the current year?
So the answer to my question would be, I'm assuming that 200,000 can be used for other than road improvement.
It can be used for anything, because it's fund balance. So the town council has the purview to allocate fund balance during this process for virtually anything within the operating budget. You can just designate X amount of money in the operating from fund balance towards the budget, and it just lowers the mill rate impact.
So by taking that $200,000 out, that lowers the mill rate?
No, so.
You got it dumb enough for me.
So that's okay. So by reducing the reliance on fund balance, by reducing that fund balance allocation of, $1.5 million down to $450,000, increased mill rate. Because you're not using a different revenue source to lower the amount on taxation. So if you decide to take that $200,000 and put it to something else, then you will lower the mill rate ask in this budget.
Okay, so where do we have that 200,000?
It's in fund balance.
So is it allocated to something, or
Nothing.
is it just in?
It's just in fund balance. It's in fund balance, which is in your bottom line. It's your capital. It's if you're in a business, this is your working capital, or your net profit and loss over time, right? So this is your bottom line equity, right? This is the town's bottom line equity. So the town council has the purview to be able to propose the utilization of that fund balance for anything within the document.
Could you maybe explain that? We want to do this during the budget process and
Sure.
not do a supplemental appropriation during the year.
Right.
That puts more, because fund
Yeah.
balance is we can access fund balance at any time.
You can.
But right now, the credit agencies like it when we're doing it now versus
Right.
a supplemental.
So one of the reasons to look at utilizing and consider the utilization of fund balance during your budget process is credit, when we go for our ratings for our debt service, which we will be doing for upcoming debt issuances. Clearly, when you're addressing it and identifying the use of it during your budget process, it's a planned use, right? Everyone here is agreeing that it's a planned use and we intend to do this. When you do it in the middle of the year because something has cropped up and you've decided you need to activate fund balance, it's viewed as an emergency supplemental appropriation. So our credit rating agencies will look at that and say, why wasn't it looked at during the budget process? How did you not know? And sometimes it's very reasonable to use it in that emergency situation. You have a bridge that goes out and you have a major capital investment that, has just come out of nowhere and you have to activate it. Absolutely no issue with that with credit rating agencies. However, if you have expenditure lines that are going over budget, and you decide in the middle of the year to activate your fund balance to cover that overage, That's when the credit rating agencies look at that and say, well, maybe you should have planned better within your budget process, right? So really now is the time, if you're going to activate your fund balance to offset any of your budget, any of these planned expenditures, now is really the time to do it without getting dinged from credit rating agencies in the future. We actually did get downgraded 10 years ago. Maybe it's 10 years ago, that we actually got downgraded because of the town's policy that we had around special education and our agreement that we had with the Board of Education at that time around special education costs. So the town was making regular mid-year supplemental appropriations around over expenditures with regards to special education that typically the Board of Education returned at the end of every year. Even though they returned it at the end of every year predominantly, the credit rating agencies still said, but why are you making a supplemental appropriation in the middle of the year? You're not budgeting appropriately. And so we actually got downgraded on that premise. So it's important to look at it now.
So if we need another 200,000 and we pull it out of our general funds,
Yep.
that looks bad.
No, right now it actually is fine. Right now, it does not look bad. Right now, it's a planned utilization of fund balance. We can articulate that to the credit rating agencies and explain why we were planning on doing that, whether it's to offset another capital project or whether it is to smooth out a mill rate impact of some operational cost increases over a period of time.
Now, in this budget,
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize he wasn't using it.
so in this budget, for last year, does this actually cover what we've received for COVID funds?
So
Like
COVID funds are
CARES Act.
outside of the budget. COVID funds are outside of the general fund. So this is, what you have before you is strictly general fund. Well, what we're going over right now is general fund revenue and general fund expenses.
Okay,
So,
will we receive anything for what we received?
Yeah,
COVID funds, will we receive a breakdown of what we actually spent that money on?
yes, we'll be giving you that during the regular town council communications with the finance report. So that's outside of the budget process. Okay?
Because I believe with the mill increase, because most of the public knows that we've received all kinds of monies through the CARES Act and whatever acts there, and we come back and say, okay, we're gonna increase your mill rate, I think they're gonna be extremely upset.
Sure, understand that.
I do have one question.
Sure.
On A3, under general government, the less general town revenues, the decrease in 267,000, what was that from?
So I think when we go over the revenue pages, that will more clearly outline where that decrease is. This is why I say this is the really high level. I think it's probably easier when we dig into those individual details
Okay.
as we go into the pages. So, because it kind of comes from a number of areas. It's not one specific area.
And then one other quick question on A8, the fund balance. Does what's in here include the projected 3.4 million turnback from the BOE?
So that 3.4 million was the prior fiscal year turnback from the Board of Ed. I don't believe they're projecting quite that high for the current fiscal year, but that was for 2021. And so that is reflective because the 2021 is the actual audited turnback. The estimated is based on what they're currently estimating in their financial information for turnback for the current year. And then we have what the potential proposed would be, which we reflect always in the 2022, 2023 upcoming year proposed, that everything is fully expended. We never necessarily project an automatic turnback on any of that. We just reflect expected utilization of fund balance. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We good? I'm going to move over to our green pages, which starts the revenue. So the first part of what you're seeing on page C1, the top part of the first block is taxes, and this goes over a number of things. Number one, the current property tax calculation that you see there of the 35.8 million, that is based on the mill rate that is proposed in this budget document. Supplemental motor vehicle is based on historical collections, and what we're seeing for the market of people purchasing vehicles, because that is based on how many people are purchasing vehicles after October 1st. So we look to see how much movement is in that market, and we do take a conservative approach to that to make sure that we're not overestimating. The Lake Road Generating Agreement, as you're all aware, that agreement actually expires on June 30th of the current year. We've been under negotiations, however, or evaluations. I have included a flat revenue, so I anticipate the estimate is that we will receive exactly what we received in the current fiscal year, as we have not finalized any negotiations and that hasn't come before the council. Back taxes and back taxes, liens, tax interest are all based on historical collections of those. So of back taxes, right? So whatever we collect in back taxes typically has tax interest, the interest fee associated with it, and lien fees potentially with that. And those are historical collections. Remediation refinancing, this is a payment that we actually make out related to the TIF, which is the tax incentive financing that we did for Killingly Commons, the cleanup of the Anchor Glass property. So that is a payment out, and I want to say we only have like 2 or 3 more years left of that, and then that'll go away next year. Sure. That's okay. The next group is licensing and permitting. So these are the permits that we issue within our different departments. Building permits, planning and zoning. Other permits is predominantly pistol permits. We have a high activity of pistol permits. And then the airplane tax, which is very minor. Library, the next section is fines and fees. So our library fines and fees, we did include in the existing structure. The town council will be receiving a proposal to eliminate late fines, not damaged or lost book fees, but late fines. That impact is about $2,000. We would look to reduce this revenue by about $2,000. The next grouping, which is use of monies, interest income, strictly interest income. The sewer plant site lease, this is a reduction. We have a lease with Hutchinson for the use of the old, some of the tanks of the Old Borough treatment plant. They are closing, and so we will no longer be receiving that revenue from that lease. So that zeroes out. That's part of your $200,000 loss. The communications tower lease, the town council this is reflecting our current revenue stream. The council will be receiving at your April 12th the consideration to extend an amendment with T-Mobile, which has an increased fee in it. It's about $9,000 additional for the year. So we would potentially activate an increase in additional $9,000 on that line should the council approve that licensing amendment on the 12th. That would offset that cost, that loss that we would potentially have with the library, if that's a consideration. Yes. Use your mics. Yeah.
At the top,
Yeah.
I'm sure you said this, but what's that difference? 36,225, 35?
So that's based on the actual calculation. So the 36,225, that would be what would be needed to be collected in taxes if I had approved all of the requests from the departments.
Okay.
Since I made modifications to those, the calculation and the request before you is calculated at the 35 million. So this is tied strictly to the mill rate.
Right, that part I know, I just don't understand what's the difference in the
So
million bucks or whatever.
Right, so the department box is reflecting of all revenue that supports what the department's asks are. So departments bring me their budgets.
Yeah.
Right? I make modifications to those budgets. So I have presented to you in the department column
Yeah.
all of the proposals that the departments had, and you'll see that more when we get into the expenditure pieces. So those department head proposals calculate to a mill rate and an anticipated tax collection, right?
Okay, okay, so you had to make an adjustment.
I make adjustments
Okay, okay.
to their proposals.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that first page?
Getting back to the Lake Road generating agreement,
Yes.
looking at historically, the tax collected is going down.
Need your
Oh,
mic.
yes. On the, Lake Road generating
Yeah.
agreement, looking back, going back to the 17-18 budget, it's 3.1, now we're down to 2.9.
Mm-hmm.
Is, and then you're in negotiations now.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, got some comments this week about this.
Sure.
And after someone saw the budget, they were saying, how can that number go down?
Yeah, so that was the agreed upon tax stabilization agreement that the town entered into some 20 or so years ago at this point in time. So, as with every tax stabilization agreement, there's a period of, in the very beginning, that you typically will see lower numbers that rise to a higher number, and then you typically see small decreases towards the tail end of those tax stabilization agreements. And the bulk in the middle typically stay, for the most part, fairly level. The decrease here is, just over $100,000 over a period of 5 years, almost 5 years. So that's not a dramatic drop-off or much of a substantial change in the overall tax stabilization agreement. And again, I am reflecting a status quo revenue for that agreement for the upcoming year. The council and Lake Road Generating have not reached agreements on this at this point in time. We are still in the discovery phase of that process. So this still has to come back to the town council, but I think it's reasonable for us to anticipate the same level of funding as the current year as we continue through that negotiation
I have some
process.
questions on that, right, as all this is coming out.
Sure.
And I said, wait for the budget book, because I had nothing.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
but, okay, thank you.
What do you feel, if you don't mind, what do you feel would be, probably have to go into this later, but what do you feel, are we close to that revenue for that property, or how would that work? I know you had to have
Right.
some sort of agreement 20 years ago, just to,
Yep.
just to make an incentive for us to have them here.
I
But
think
what
it's-
would a, like a plateau number be, do you know?
I don't have that number.
No.
So I would say that the town contracted with an energy consultant that is doing all of the discovery work and the valuation. That has to take place. We'll bring those to the town council and review what their projected valuation is. So I don't have those numbers at this point in time. So I can't tell you whether or not that's a good, bad, or other number, right?
Okay.
But I believe that it is fair to expect that we would be able to have the same revenue for the next year as we continue through this process. Any other questions on first page of revenues? We'll go to the next page of revenues. So the first and the second groups of this is state grants. The first one are state grants in lieu of taxation. So we have state-owned property within town that the state gives us a reimbursement of what our taxes potentially would be. I will say that it has been historically underfunded. I don't foresee us ever actually getting what the state owes us for property tax values. However, with that being said, these are the numbers straight from the governor's budget. So these are the what they have budgeted for our municipality in each of these buckets, and historically that is the value that we've carried within our budget going forward. Same with the next group, with the exception of the Pequot Mohegan Grant Fund. That one, the state legislation passed legislation last year that would restrict that funding to any municipality that has Native American imagery or mascots with Native American names or imagery, unless the Board of Educations of those towns opted to make a change to that. The superintendent and I recently just filed the certification as to the standing of Killingly's mascot and imagery, and we have maintained that mascot and imagery, so therefore we will no longer qualify for the Mohegan Pequot funding, so that's why you see the reduction out in the manager's column of that $94,000. The next grouping is charges for services, and these are really a lot of them are statutory, but the fees that we collect for various services. Community development fees, these are fees that we receive for administering grant programs for other communities. So our community development office does regional grant coordination for several other communities: Putnam, Woodstock, Stratford. We were doing Mansfield as well. And so those are revenues associated to that. The other two are purely related in town clerk. So there's town clerk fees and then conveyance tax fees. Those are related to real estate transactions. And the town clerk fees are, death and birth and other marriage licenses, all of those license fees that we collect for any of those transactions in the clerk's office. Elderly housing sewer reimbursement. This is our revenue that we receive from the housing authority, which reimburses the town for the sewer use fees from the prior fiscal year. So we really, what we do is you'll see an expenditure for housing authority, and that is the town paying their current year sewer user fees, and they'll reimburse us the following year. It gives the housing authority the ability to smooth in any rate increases because our budget cycles are not coincided directly, and it would be challenging for them to have a mid-cycle significant increase. So that's been a long-term agreement with the towns, supported by legislation.
I just want to comment a little bit on that. They really appreciate us giving them it's basically the town giving them a 1-year delay, that they know in advance, they have a year in advance to pick it up. When I first came on the council, I couldn't understand what that was, but it's very helpful, especially when there's a couple of years ago, they had a big increase, and it was like, well, we have a year to prepare for it. So it's confusing in here, why are we paying for that? But it's a well worthwhile expenditure.
The next line is recreation, and these are all the fees that we generate from program fees for recreation. Somebody's looking for somebody. Okay. District collections. The town has an agreement with the Danielson Borough to act as their tax collector. So this offsets all fees associated with the collection of the district taxes. So we have that's reflective of that agreement. Is there any other questions on page 2 of revenues? Okay, page 3, other revenues. This is a collection of exactly that, other revenues. Miscellaneous, that is largely made up of, so Kerma, our insurance company, for the last 10 years has been giving member towns a member distribution. So that revenue that we've received, what did we receive in the current year? It was about $56,000 in the current year that we received. That's where we post that miscellaneous revenue. We also posted miscellaneous revenue. Our highway department and our Board of Education has regular disposals of scrap metal. Any of that revenue also goes into there. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of other revenues that we may receive throughout the year that doesn't have necessarily another budgeted category. And you'll note that some years we have a lot of it, and some years, in this trend, it looks like we've had a lot every year. But and if you went back in years prior, we didn't necessarily always meet that budget. So we're conservative on that. Sewer assessment fund. This is the town. The WPCA has specific agreements around certain sewer connections. These are roads that were expanded upon. We agreed to do a sewer assessment to help offset some of the cost of the establishment of that paved road. This is the transfer from the WPCA into the town for those sewer assessments to offset that long-term agreement. Sewer operating fund, this is the reimbursement from the WPCA to the town for the debt service incurred by the WPCA, as well as operational costs. So it offsets our tax collecting department for the collection of sewer user fees. It offsets the time spent by our engineering department on WPCA-related matters, the finance department on paying bills and reconciling accounts and all of that for the WPCA, and my office, my time with regards to, oversight of the WPCA and any of their contracts, right? So this is a reimbursement to better categorize time spent and resources allocated from general fund staff to the WPCA, so it's properly paid for by sewer user rates. Pilot, this is a payment that we receive from the communications companies. It's in lieu of taxations. It's a legislative cure, if you will, that the legislation put in place. And so they pay us based on a payment in lieu of. The next line is law enforcement. This is the reimbursement that we receive from the Board of Education for the SRO that is assigned to the Board of Education. And so they have that built into their budget. This is recognizing the revenue on the general fund side because we have the expenditures in our law enforcement budget. So without recognizing this revenue, we would actually we would have it double counted in the Board of Education budget as well as in the town budget, right? So this is properly reflecting that transfer. School capital contribution, this is revenue that the Board of Education we receive through the Board of Education from our sending towns, predominantly Brooklyn. It's Brooklyn, for the construction, to offset debt service on the construction of the new high school. That was an agreement that the town entered into, way back when we were getting ready to build the high school, that Brooklyn would share in those debt service costs. So we calculate what is the actual impact of that debt service by pupil, and then Brooklyn determines how many sending students they have, and Brooklyn pays that capital contribution, which is recognized here to offset debt service, yes.
Sorry, Mary, it's that same question again.
It's okay.
So they reimburse 180, but you've got 84 on the law enforcement SRO.
So in the department column,
Yeah,
that was reflecting the add of an additional SRO.
right.
The Board of Ed did not actually include that in their budget. So in the manager's column, I've reduced that out. So we've also had to recognize the reduction in revenue.
Okay,
So one SRO, the reimbursement is $84,000.
okay.
And just real quick, when it comes down to our law enforcement as well, and I already know the answer, but just for anybody that might be listening, when they write tickets, when they collect fees for fingerprinting, things like that, if they do that over at the troop, that money all goes to the state of Connecticut.
Correct. We receive none of that revenue because they are directed and 100% of their work product is state of Connecticut. Yes.
I just have one question. Back to the SRO. I know previously there had been a grant available from the state to cover that. Is that something that's still available, or?
So they were the grant opportunity we had applied for and we did not receive. The grant opportunity was really about being able to provide funds to help departments that were seeing reduction in staff, and they were looking to maintain existing staff, not necessarily grow a program.
Okay.
So the same grant opportunity is out there again. However, I don't believe the town necessarily qualifies in that eligibility. So I have not sought that grant again at this point in time. But we do continue to watch for opportunities where a grant may provide the expansion of a program. Sustainably, I will say, sustainably.
So they're not gonna add a second SRO?
Correct. The Board of Education budget did not propose adding a second SRO.
Okay, that's why.
Yep.
I wanted it, but you,
So it was mentioned by several members that they were considering putting in an SRO into the budget. That never came to fruition through their budget process. And so I wanted to properly reflect that that was not a consideration. So in my initial build of our budget, I was taking that into consideration. So in the department request on the town side, you're going to see 3 officers being proposed. One is an SRO, 2 as new staff members. When the Board of Education budget was transmitted with no request for the SRO, the manager's column had to reflect that. And so I removed it from the manager's column. The next grouping on this budget is the school. So this is all the revenue that the Board of Education is anticipating receiving. The first part of that, education cost sharing, vocation, the VOAG, tech, and the non-public school health, those are all state grant numbers. Those come straight from the governor's budget. So that's not an estimation by the Board of Education. The tuition components, those are estimations by the Board of Education as to what they believe they're going to receive in tuition revenue in the upcoming fiscal year. The last grouping is the use of fund balance. So this is where it goes back to our fund balance conversation of what we had on in the A pages. So you can see in the current fiscal year the breakdown of that utilization of fund balance, and then what the budget before you, what is actually proposed use of fund balance. Again, town council purview to change that, and if you decide to make a change on that, it'll get reflected here in the revenue pages, not necessarily in the back in the expenditure pages, right? So while we are saying that, if you say you want to add an additional $200,000 for whatever expenditure, we're not going to reduce that expenditure, we're going to recognize the revenue here, and that will lower the mill rate. Make sense? Okay. Any questions on revenue? Okay, we're going to go to the D pages. These are all the expenditure side of the budget, right? So we have the revenue side. These are the expenditure side that drives what our overall mill rate is going to look like. On the town council's page, slight decrease, and that's really decreasing the amount in contractual services support. This really is the cost for secretarial services, and then a small amount in case the town decides the town council wants to explore a certain study or hire a consultant to do some specific work. I feel that historically the town council hasn't necessarily utilized this line for that. We've activated contingency or some other grant process for that because typically they far exceed what's available in this account. So I've reduced that by the $2,000. There is slight increases in printing and in advertising, and those are strictly market driven. The advertising for the budget comes out of this, so we have to, advertise large amounts within the Norwich Bulletin, and those rates are all increasing. So overall, there is a decrease to this proposed budget. Any questions?
On the office supplies, I see there's a reduction of 200 over last year. Is that based off of the fact of what our expenditures have been the past couple of years?
Yeah,
or
that's
you're
just
actually-
historical trends.
Okay.
That what we're actually expending. I'm trying to, make sure that we're more closely reflecting those historical trends
Thank you.
and accounting for any potential market increases, but I think that will be sufficient. Any other questions? Moving on to the managers, the department number 2, which is the town manager's budget. This is where we actually introduce some modification and what I would call some shifting within personnel for efficiency purposes. I have a new line under personnel called technical, and this is really a reconfiguration of an existing now open position that we have actually posted. So the administrative assistant for the Economic Development Commission that was also the Economic Development Office that was also back up to my office. She has retired, and as with any vacancy, I always look at what is the best utilization and the most efficient use of a position. And so we've reimagined that position, and while that position will still provide backup and support to my office, as well as the Economic Development Office, the predominant look to this position will be grant writing. And grant administration. So that is the current job description that is out on the streets right now. And that position will report to me, which is why you're going to see a reduction in the Economic Development Commission's Economic Development Office, that department. You'll see that position completely zero out of that budget. It's going to move over here. And I've also reduced the scope of services for under the Community Development Office, under that project coordinator. and I've moved the grant writing tasks over to this piece, right? So there's kind of a combined joint effort to move that over. The community development, when we get to that budget, you're not going to see that zero out because there is still a large amount of administrative and project coordination that we're going to be looking at potentially hiring for that, for a position, hiring a person for that position. That position is currently vacant at the moment, but we will be looking to hire that, as Mary Brahm is also going to be managing 2 large capital building infrastructure projects. She's going to need to have that additional administrative position. So it doesn't zero out, but it does take some of the expected scope off of that, and you're still going to see the transition here. So the net within the budget, it's a net zero. So while there's an add here, there's decreases elsewhere within the budget to offset that. So the other components to mine are all decreases, and that's just to be more reflective of what historical spends have been and anticipated upcoming spends. Any questions on town manager?
What's your package detail, percentage-wise? What do you figure, like, for insurances and whatnot? These are, like, the 59,000, that's gotta be a base salary, so what do you
Yes.
figure on top, just out of curiosity?
So our average fringe rate, yeah, our average fringe rate is about 50%. All of our fringes are included in the employee benefits department, so those are
Right.
all captured in a separate department. These are all just wage rates.
So additional 50%?
Yes,
Yep.
roughly. Any other questions on manager's budget? Okay. Legal services, this is our town attorney and any other outside legal services that we procure throughout the year. I anticipate this current year that we will actually come in under expended. I will say that I've left it level funded for the upcoming year because we still have some litigation that just continues. So my hope is that next year we can hopefully by next year we can wrap up some of that. And again, it's one of those with litigation, you never know when it's going to crop up. It's always better to have something planned just in case. But I think that we might be able to, in future years, maybe look at that. But the reduction would be minimal on that, just for that being conservative. Department 4, Town Clerk. So just for everyone's purpose, I will be looking to have somebody cue me to stop about 10 minutes before 10 o'clock because the Board of Ed will be coming in for their 10 o'clock beginning of their presentation, and I don't want to run over their time. So cue me when you're ready for me to just stop talking. But I'll keep charging through. So I've only ever presented this whole document in 2 hours once, so we'll see how far we get. Town clerks. It was the year of the fire. It was my first year back in. So anyway, town clerk's office. So this department, the increase within personnel is reflective of the union contractual increase that we have in there. You'll note that all the salary administrative lines all the way across this do not reflect any increase. That is built into our contingency line item at the very end. We have that. We have a percentage increase calculated into that for consideration, but the town council takes up that item after the new year starts. And so you will weigh in on that in July or August of the upcoming year. So we do not reflect it preemptively within these department budgets. They are always reflected within contingency. The overall, a lot of the modifications, all of the modifications, including the data processing, that is all reflective of historical spends. So you'll note that on the data processing, we have budgeted $24,000. Our actual spend is going to be closer to $29,000. And that is really, we have a fee that we have to pay for every recording of land use transaction into our computer system. So we have a lot of transactions that are occurring. That's the fee related to that. So that's overall town clerks. Any question on town clerk? Okay, finance. Minimal change within the finance department. The technical is related to union contract. The I will note here that we are evaluating, we have not, the town council has not appointed auditors for the upcoming fiscal year. We're evaluating that process at the moment. That number may change, but any change to that number, we would potentially be able to look to have the council make a modification, utilize contingency to handle that, any modification. So we're not reflecting any change in that because we don't have an updated fee number. Yes.
With the KMS project and the upgrades to the Westfield Ave,
Mm-hmm.
does that have a bearing on finance? Is there any negotiations or
No.
something going on with that?
Yeah, no, so that's really, the heavy workload for that is really in the Permanent Building Commission budget and in anything that would be reflected within the community development project. For finance, they have more invoices to process. And they have to balance and reconcile those, but it's no different than any other capital project, right? So they manage capital project fund now. There's no difference to that. And it doesn't impact our audit necessarily either. It's just a capital project. Okay. Any questions on finance? We'll move over to assessor. The assessor's budget, the increase again in personnel is again union contract. The increase in printing is related to the printing of the grand lists. They are required to physically have the grand lists printed, bound, and we are required to maintain those. That cost has increased. So we're reflecting what our actual increase is for that printing costs. Knowledge and reference, they're having some new valuation books that are coming out, and they have a higher cost to that. It's imperative that they have the latest information with regards to assessment and valuation techniques. So important, and I recognize that within here. So those are really the two changes within that budget. Any questions on assessor? Revenue collection. Revenue collection, again, on the wages component, those are all related to union contract increases, contractual wage increases. Under printing, that is the printing of the bills. So we print out our bills. We have our software company that maintains our software. They also print our bills and prepare them for mailing. That's the increase in that cost for printing. We have over the years looked at whether or not it makes sense for the town internally to print all of those bills. We have to invest in specific equipment in order to do that because it's a 4-part bill. And the folding and all of that, it ends up not being cost effective when you get through that whole entire process. We don't actually recoup any additional costs that we would have in having it outside printed. So it makes sense for us to maintain that relationship.
Where does in revenue collection, we collect the fees for the WPCA, how does that show up?
So we reflect here 100% of the cost of what it would be of our revenue collection process, whether it's WPCA, whether it is the borough district collections. We recognize the cost of that or the reimbursement from that in the revenues, right? So if we went back to the green pages and we go back to other revenue, to the charges for services, you see that we collect a little over $15,000 for district collections. That goes to offset predominantly costs within this that are allocated to our revenue collections time and costs associated to that, as well as it's part of the calculation for the sewer operating fund revenue, right? So we show these numbers. This is the total cost of the full use of the revenue office. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, this is the process to collect all the revenue. Any questions? Moving on to registrations and elections. So this is our registrar's budget. So the registrars came to me with a request to increase based on salary survey. They did some evaluation of other registrars around the area to determine their fees haven't been necessarily modified substantially in quite a period of time. They've been kind of going along with the department head increases on an annual basis or less than that on an annual basis. So they are elected officials, and so their number is set here within the budget. You don't consider that separately when we do the non-union wage increases. They are considered here in the budget. So they requested an increase up to $12,000 apiece. I did a separate salary survey evaluation, and I really parceled out those that are really part-time, that don't have any posted public hours for, they don't maintain a public office where people can walk in during, Monday through Friday during certain set hours. Ours don't maintain that. Ours have, they come in periodically throughout the week, but it's not set up where the public may not have direct access to them. They typically go by email or by voicemail message, and they respond that way to the public, as opposed to having what I would consider counter hours, where they could just come up to the counter, right? So I really tried to evaluate where they are currently wage-wise to those within the within that population that are in that same avenue, and they are below all of the other registrars, and so I am recommending an increase up to $11,000 for each of them in the upcoming budget. So that is based on a salary evaluation that I performed as well, in addition to what they did for performing. I have communicated this to our registrars. They were satisfied with what I've presented to you.
What's the average?
The
Sorry.
average is right around that 11,000 is the average. There's some that are down below, just under 10,000, but there are some that are up over 15,000. So the 11,000 for our populations, and I didn't look just at our population size. I looked at the actual number of registered voters, because that's actually their workload, not necessarily the population. And so I was really looking at the number of registered voters that each of these departments were working on, and it's really right around in that range. So I really felt 11,000 was reflective of the market and what other towns were paying for that service.
Signage, all the signage is usually burnt, comes out of the highway department budget. They're gonna make signs and whatnot. I'm
Yep.
talking to Matt a little, he used to just busting his chops, he says, you're paying for them. Is there somebody that?
He pays for all of our signs, though. Let's be fair.
Well, okay.
He pays for everybody's signs.
Well, that's what it is, but.
So
I
it's not
mean,
just registrars.
Do they make a contribution
No.
from here to there to?
No, we reflect all signs that need to be made. So even when we did the COVID distribution, the signs that were made for that, those are all coming out of the sign budget in the highway department. So all of any signs that are made for any purpose throughout town are all reflected in the highway department. It's very challenging, and you actually spend a lot more time and energy trying to parcel out, well, what department was this sign for, and what cause was that sign for? It makes it an administrative nightmare on the finance directors, on the finance office staff, and you waste more resources trying to do that rather than just capturing what is our total cost for signs in one department. And so we've maintained them all in there. And a lot of the times, signs, they can reuse those signs. So they can take those sign plates when we don't need them anymore. They can take them, strip all the vinyl off them, and reuse them. And so then, how does if it got paid for by the registrars, and now we're going to repurpose it for something else? Who pays that additional cost, right? So it's just easier and cleaner to keep it all in one budget.
But the registrars determine what kind of signage and what is needed by the highway. They have to get to the highway. There is a communication.
Oh, yes, they definitely communicate that we're going to be having a referendum. I work with them as well as what we want to see for signage. I know there's a push to put more information on the signage. Matt has contribution, our highway director has contribution into that, because there's only so much verbiage you can put on a sign.
Right.
And to meet, proper protocol as far as visually being able to see it. You can put a lot of information on a sign, but if you're using 12 font on the sign, nobody can read it when they're driving by, right? So you need to make sure that, and so he keeps us in check as far as how much you can actually fit on a sign appropriately placed on the side of a road for people to be able to read the information. So he manages all that.
Just to try to take the.
Yeah, exactly. So, Contractual services support is a decrease based on actual trending information. While we're expending $1,800 in the current year, that was for a one-time, I want to say that was for batteries or for a reconfiguration on the voting machines. They don't expect to have to do that in the upcoming year, so we've reduced it down to 1,000. So overall, their budget actually has an overall decrease. And again, so in personnel, election and poll workers, my recommended decrease of 5,000 is really reflective of what we're actually trending for spend in that over an average year. So, and this year we don't have a presidential election. While we have a gubernatorial race, we don't have a presidential, which typically lessens their need for having as many poll workers. Like when you have a presidential, you have primary. But you also you tend to have a lot more staff. So I felt comfortable bringing it down to the 35,000. Any other questions on registrars? Moving over to town commissions. And overall, you're seeing reductions in the town commissions. Housing authority, again, that's that sewer reimbursement, right? So this is the projected. We're projecting that we're going to pay $29,500 for housing authority sewer user fees. The following year, we'll look at getting that revenue back, but that's the amount there. You're seeing an uptick in the amount for permanent building commission, and that's related to additional meetings that they're going to need to have for the capital projects. They're going to need to start holding probably at least twice a month meetings in order as they start moving forward into that final design and bidding phase of the KMS project. Any questions on town commissions? Seeing none, we'll go to planning and development. Planning and development, the change here really is related to, in personnel, is related to contractual wage increases, and then minor adjustments in other categories to be reflective of historical spends. Any questions on planning and development? No? Okay. Information technology. So this budget captures all of our software renewal costs, as well as our network. We have a contract, outside contract that manages our network. So it incorporates all of that. The biggest increases that we've had within this is, one, we are proposing the implementation of a transparency program that would allow us to post on our website information from the town's financial system onto the website, and that's that financial transparency that the town council was looking at. That's about $9,000 for the implementation, and ongoing after that, it'll be about $6,000 annually to maintain that system. Another one that is a big change for this year is Microsoft Office 365. That's the office platform that we use. They've had a substantial increase. Many know this. They've had a substantial increase in costs, so we have to absorb that. That's just we could not function without Microsoft Office, as many people wouldn't. So that's the biggest changes within that budget. Any questions?
As far as on the information, now, if we were looking for an additional signboard at Owen Bell, where would that come? Would that come in the budget, or?
No, that would actually be a capital outlay request that I would put in the highway department. Because that's a mobile, you mean the permanent digital display? I would actually put that under parks then.
Okay.
That would be a request for that infrastructure, and that would be in the parks and capital outlay. This budget does not propose that. We would have to do some additional evaluation as far as additional costs, but I want to say probably all in and fully installed, you're probably looking at between $25,000 to $30,000. And I will say that I haven't done a current price check on some of that equipment. So given the substantial changes in materials, even within the last week, I would want to really get a much firmer number before consideration.
Because I get some questions on this. We're not getting the information. That's what I keep hearing.
So we evaluated that.
You go to the website, you go here, we're still not getting it, and then, someone will say, well, you guys were talking about Owen Bell, and I don't hear anything, so that's why.
Yeah, sure, and I can work with, clearly I'm in the process of going through a hiring process for a new Parks and Recreation Director. I would want to get that person on board so that way they could kind of walk through this capital project with us. But we need to reevaluate potential location for that there as well, and what available electrical, like how long, what we would need to install for infrastructure in order to be able to put that sign. And that is a very complex and busy intersection. So adding additional lighting components at that is also a challenging component. It's also a state road.
Right.
So we need to, there's a lot of working parts with that. So we can continue, I want to be able to evaluate that, but I need to get the staffing on board to begin to be able to evaluate that process. So I'm not going to be able to bring anything like next month to the council, but maybe hopefully by the fall, we can have some evaluation prepared.
How do you program those signs, Mary? Is it right there or from
No,
here?
it's usually,
Oh.
it's on a laptop, or a lot of them, you can even do it from an app on your phone.
No response necessary, because you probably have to talk too much. But have we ever considered, have we ever, just some food for thought, because I would be for it, depending on the cost, but you have a technology/economic development person coming in, would it behoove us to have somebody that does web design that can update our own website and whatnots to?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
$200,000, I don't know how that breaks out by just this one line item.
Yeah, we
But-
have a lot of components within this one
Yeah.
line item between all of the different software renewals that we do, as well as our networking. So website, we have a website. We do have a renewal amount that we pay for our website on an annual basis. I will say that's been a conversation most recently that I've had with my staff, because staff-wise, we maintain our own website. It's been economic. It's been the most economic way of managing our website, because we have so much changes that happen so fast and on such a regular basis, and we have so many departments. It's a lot of volume, right? So we really work on training our staff to be able to manage their own individual spaces. And inevitably, we always have the balance and the challenge around everybody wants to be on the front page. Everybody wants their stuff on the front page, right? And it is, from a statistical standpoint, you never want your home landing page to require anybody to scroll, because people don't scroll. They assume that whatever is on the screen is all the information there is, and they forget to scroll. We don't like to scroll down. That's just the way it is. So we try and capture the most priority and pressing things on the very front, and everything else has to land on the individual commission or department's pages, right? Which, every department has their priorities. Every department has their, pressing issues they want to get out to the public. And how do you manage all of these departments that have, 2, 3, 4 things that they pressingly want to get out? We have to rotate that through on the website. That being said, most recently, we've had some significant challenges with our website. It has been clunky. It has been dropping things off the website. It has been breaking links all over the place. So I'm actually having conversations with my staff as to whether or not we need to look at the last time we upgraded our software, our platform, our website platform, was about 5 or 6 years ago. It was when I was still here as a finance director, was when we were looking at that. So about 5 or 6 years ago was when we last did that. It's about time for us to look at that again. And so we may need to look at implementing a new software platform, a new website platform, and hopefully correcting some of these cumbersome pieces that we're challenged with right now. There are some components on our website that, it's like an act of God to get them changed. It shouldn't be. I just want to change my hours on the bottom, right? Like, I should be able to do that. And our staff ends up having to spend half a day trying to get those components fixed, right, or changed. So it's a waste of resources if there's a better platform out there. So what we would look to do for a new implementation of a website platform is we would look to utilize our IT reserve. That's what our IT reserve fund is for. And we'll get to how we fund that when we get to the bottom part of the D pages. But we look to implement any of our brand new implementations of software. We look to fund out of the IT reserve because we've set aside money over time, as well as some of our, as well as our hardware, our regular hardware replacement cycle that we do, because we regularly replace our hardware throughout the system, so that way we're not running obsolete and unsupported systems. You're welcome. So you probably didn't want all of that language, right? But there you go. I talk a lot. Town hall building. So town hall building, relatively, electricity, it's up. We have, our town hall is now more utilized than it's ever been in the past. Our law enforcement division is here all throughout the weekend. They're here nearly 20, they're here, Jen, why am I buzzing?
It's the, that's the.
Oh, hand dryer, okay, sorry. I thought it was the microphone. I was like, I don't want to like blow out people's ears on Facebook. So the electricity, it's just, we're seeing increase in electricity costs as well as higher utilization of the town building. So we need to recognize that additional cost. And you'll see that, the past couple of years, we're seeing that increase, and that's really our higher utilization of this building. Even when we weren't holding as many night meetings for boards and commissions, but rather we have staff in the building throughout, 7 days a week. The request for the increase to CNR, so CNR, capital non-recurring, this is our reserve fund that we put money in every year for our equipment replacements, right? So we take what is the cost of a vehicle when we purchase the vehicle, and we depreciate that over a useful life of that vehicle. So when we get to the end of the useful life of the vehicle, we have money in the reserves to be able to purchase a replacement. The town of Killingly, historically, we do not do leased vehicles. Economically, it's not a very good use of resources, and so we have established this fund for almost 20 years now to be able to replace that. That being said, we have a 2010 hybrid vehicle. This has been a thorn in our side for several years now. It's completely unreliable. You may drive out to a site with it, but you may not be driving back with it because it just dies. It just dies. And it's been an issue with that vehicle for quite some time, which means the town staff don't trust it anymore because they've been stranded too many times. And so we're having a hard time filling all of our fleet needs and requests for people. So some people have had to use their personal vehicles. I prefer that we use fleet vehicles, especially when we're going to interact at a person's home or on a job site. Unfortunately, purchasing a new vehicle now costs a lot more money than when we originally purchased this vehicle, right? So 2010 to now, we purchase new vehicles because economically, typically, it does not make sense for us to purchase used vehicles where, it's not the value that you would get for the use that we're using it for. It usually costs us more in the long run to buy a used. So we're buying a new vehicle. So the request here is an additional $5,700 to bring what we have in the reserves for that vehicle up to what a current purchase cost is, which is about $24,000. So we're not looking at buying some, major new vehicle. We're looking at buying a simple replacement vehicle.
Mary, I've got a question. Due to the fact we have a hybrid vehicle in a fleet, how many hybrid vehicles do we have? And as far as the mechanics of the town garage, do they have training specifically in hybrids? Due to, I know personally how it's a whole different animal.
Yeah, so we actually don't have that many hybrid vehicles. Back in 2010, we did purchase 2 vehicles that were hybrid. Back then, we had sunsetted one out some time ago because both vehicles had been running into significant battery problems throughout. When we did receive those vehicles, our mechanics did have training in hybrid, and they maintained that training. However, I think it was just the make and the model that we got at the time. It was just a chronic problem within that system. This one has survived for the longest, which is kudos to our maintenance department for being able to make sure that they were able to sustain it for as long as it is. Most of our vehicles, our pool vehicles, we depreciate for only a 7-year time frame. So this is well beyond 7 years in maintaining this vehicle. So they've done a very good job on it. It's just become very unreliable at this point. We do not, since that time period, we have not purchased additional hybrid vehicles because we did have such poor response from the first time around with hybrid vehicles. Given how far they have come since 2010, it may be an avenue that we pursue later on. However, at this point, we're looking at just purchasing very, efficient standard vehicles.
And I'm assuming the town garage, I know this may be completely unrelated, but since we're on hybrids, they have all the special safety equipment that's required. I know every 6 months you actually have to replace the high voltage gloves. They are not cheap.
Yeah, I would say that we do, or we contract out for the components that are required that would need those. But I would double check with Matt but I'm sure that we do. Where safety is a high priority of our highway director, and so anything that requires calibration or replacement, he is very diligent in getting that done.
Mr. Granowski.
The vehicle charging station out here,
Yes.
what's the life expectancy of that? And right now, it's a free service. There's no
Yep.
charge for someone to plug into it.
Yep.
If someone's there all day, or there's signage up there, and I've been getting some comments about that.
Yeah.
That's why are we a free?
Yes.
Why are we in the electric charging business?
Yeah, so the town, when we originally installed that under a grant program. And that grant program required that for the first 3 years after installation, that it was free. And the model that was approved through that grant for all of the municipalities to install did not include any way to easily activate a way to charge people for their electricity. It didn't have a component where you could add like a billing, like a card swipe or anything like that onto it. And in order to add that feature to it, you're almost replacing the entire system. So at this point, we are exploring. There are several grant opportunities that are out there that do not have the caveat of requiring it to be free, but would come with the ability for somebody to have an app on their phone that would be able to reserve and pay for their whatever they utilize in electricity, as well as we would be able to put parameters on it where it would actually shut off after a certain period of time. So while they may be connected to it, they're not actually receiving any power off of it. And you're not having the ghost power also shedding off of the system while somebody's still plugged in and overcharged, right? So we are exploring that to be able to roll out a new charging station here and potential new charging stations at other town facilities as well. But
This is the only one we have.
this is the only current one that we have right now, and so we are looking at being able to replace that. We've actually replaced, so the first model that was distributed to us, I don't know if anybody remembers, but it was almost inoperable for about a year after we received it. And they had to keep flying people out from California to replace various parts of it for a better part of a year before they finally got it working. Your average EV charging station, you would want to look to replace about every 7 to 10 years. So we're kind of at the cusp of it at this point in time. So we're actively looking at. The engineering department has been evaluating several grant programs, and they're evaluating cost factors.
What is the state's outlook? Are we supposed to supply some of this, or is it the town's responsibility? Or?
No, they want to have the infrastructure available, but not necessarily free.
Right, that's what I mean.
Right. They want the infrastructure. So there's definitely incentives for like Eversource and other grant opportunities to be able to roll out the infrastructure and expand the availability of the infrastructure in public locations, but not free to the consumer.
See, like, but this one is not this is not a fast charge station. This is.
Correct.
You're there for a while, that you could get you're there for charge. So.
This is one of the first oldies but goodies.
Just wanna throw it out there.
It's like the payphone before the smartphone.
So, Mary, a few things there. Obviously, considering the dramatic increases in everything, from groceries to materials, I'm assuming just this is kind of an overarching question. You've taken that into account. with
Absolutely.
All of this, and that's what I figured. Last night, as we're considering, replacing another vehicle, last night I was listening to the radio, and I don't think a lot of people have ever heard this, because this was the first I heard of it. They're considering that by 2026, they want to have it where all new vehicles sold in the United States have to have a mile per gallon of 40 miles per gallon.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like we're kind of being forced into that hybrid outlook. So that's just something for us to always have in the back of our mind.
We
as
watch
well.
those. We watch those trends on a regular basis. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's nothing new. That's been around for years where they've had the projections on minimum fuel economy. It changes, varied year to year. But
And they push it out.
Yep. I can't
As
tell
the
you how
closer
many
you get to
times.
it, they start pushing it out because
Yep.
realistically, to try and get to that is challenging. So,
Yeah.
we monitor it. We see how close we are to that. We look at our fleet and we look at, vehicle replacement, and try and, because clearly it's way more efficient if we're able to purchase a vehicle that has high, that gets a high gallons per mile, right? But we have to offset what is the overall longevity for maintenance on that vehicle as well. And you have to factor that in.
the other
And
thing-
reliability of it.
Yeah. The other thing to consider on that note is just because a vehicle gets better miles per gallon, doesn't mean it's always the cleanest either. You roll back to a lot of these emissions devices reduce a vehicle's ability to get more miles per gallon.
Correct.
So it's a
And
balance.
The materials needed for the batteries for all these are hazardous materials anyways. So, and mining is an environmental disaster in and of itself, so.
But is there like a push for our highway department, with the big trucks?
No.
What are you seeing with that?
No, we're not seeing a push for that at this point. We have a proposal, part of our proposal in here, part of the use of CNR funds is to replace one of our dump trucks. We typically try and look to replace one annually. And so that one is a standard diesel truck. Yes.
So it's good to hear we're not gonna have any Tesla trucks coming in the near future for.
Nothing in the near future.
Beautiful.
No self-driving trucks.
Yeah, that would be a cost savings, just, we wouldn't have to.
I'm not going there, Ed. I'm not going there, Ed. Well, it's you got to deal with public safety. You got to deal with, is the technology really ready and advanced enough to be able to manage that? There's such huge variances when you come to weather and conditions. They're constantly adjusting their applications and their treatments throughout an entire storm. That's a lot of technology to build into a truck that you're going to send out on the road. I don't think they're anywhere near that.
Even if it worked, it put somebody out of work.
Well, that, and then you gotta, once it goes out of control and run somebody over in the city, so then you got people.
We have nothing like that in this budget.
Well, we could have had it when they had the piles of snow on the street and they were trying to get through and.
We have
automatic
nothing.
pilot, and all of a sudden.
Nothing
that's
like
no-
that.
Yeah, it would be crazy.
Anything else for town hall building? Okay, economic development, this is where you're seeing the modification or the reallocation of personnel from this department to the town manager's department, so that's really the big shift here. There is an adjustment in salary. I did have to reevaluate this position to determine market value on this position, and so I did make a modification to the existing staff that's there. And that position is also taking up more administrative tasks, so there's less of a backfill need for, by losing the admin on this, so that's the adjustment there. Highway supervision, so this one is strictly just the supervision, so this is the highway director, assistant highway director, and the administrative component, which is a part-time administrative staff, and the components related to that. Overall, no significant change, a slight decrease, and that's really related to just historical trends data and historical spend. Any questions on that one? Engineering and facilities administration. So really the big change on this one is, as I previously mentioned, my proposal here is to add a building maintainer. That is in the technical line. So you're seeing that 70,000. That technical line includes that the 70,000 is not just the cost for adding that position. There is an union wage increase that is built in for the existing staff member. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
You said that was in a technical line, isn't it? in
I'm
the
sorry,
labor line?
labor line.
Okay, thank
Sorry,
you.
I read the wrong line, labor line. So the current staff that's in there has a union contract increase that is reflected in that. The increase for the second facilities maintainer is in the wage line, roughly $67,000. That's the increase there. And that's essentially the bulk of the increase that you're seeing there. That's the change in this budget. Any questions in the engineering budget? Moving on to central garage. Central garage, this budget, yep.
I have a question, Mary, on that, the last one. So could you, do you have a breakdown on what your new employee will be doing? Like, I don't really know what that.
Yeah, so that position will be working with the existing building maintainer and managing things like doing preventative maintenance on all of our HVAC systems, including filter changes. Also doing, for instance, you saw how this room, he redid all the carpeting in this room, redid painting. He just recently refinished all of and managed all of the water damage around all of the window openings within this room. So a lot of that building maintenance. And right now, I have one person that's spread across 5 very large
Okay,
buildings.
So it saves a lot of money contracting out.
He remodeled the police space and also just recently redid the entire break room. So without this position, by adding this position, we'll be able to manage far more of these projects that have just continued to linger year after year. And it prevents us from having to either go into an emergency situation where we have to contract out because this individual just doesn't have enough time. So he does a lot of that work.
That's one thing about, I can honestly say about our grounds and our building maintainers and our highway department. We do a lot of stuff in-house.
We do.
A lot of towns contract that out and they pay for that. But we pay, our guys do it.
So when you say manage, he actually has subcontractors doing the work?
Not necessarily, no. He does all the work himself.
He does?
Yes, so he
Okay.
laid this whole floor himself. He redid the entire break room by himself. There are times where he has additional staff from the highway department come in and assist him, whether through the demolition phase. He may have other staff from the highway department come in and assist him for that portion of the day, but he essentially does it all himself. If we have to hire a contractor to do it, our town engineer oversees that contract. But
I just think that's important to know that, because when you say manage,
Yeah.
manage to me would be, okay, you do this, you do that, so that's
No.
awesome that he does that.
nope,
That's
he
great.
hands-on does it all himself.
The bathroom, actually, the bathrooms at Owen Bell up on top were completely done in-house.
Yes.
We did everything.
Yes. Yes.
So, in the WPCA, the component that some of the expenses of engineering is shared by WPCA in there.
Correct. So this reflects all of the costs of the engineering department. Any time associated with the WPCA is reflected in the revenue reimbursement from the WPCA and the revenue department, and the revenue pages. Any other questions on engineering? Central garage budget is truly our maintenance costs for maintaining all of our fleets, and the actual building, the highway building, the actual highway garage building itself, right? So the labor line, that is union contractual wage increases. Heating fuel, this is the first time you're going to start to see the impacts of the increased in fuel prices. We did lock into those prices into a locked fixed price for the upcoming year. So we're not going to be subject to market trends and the spikes, but it is roughly $1 more per gallon that we were able to lock into than what we previously in our current year budget. So that's the increase related to that market swing. The increase in repair parts, this is a shift we had in prior years. In the current year budget, we had reflected parts for our law enforcement vehicles in our law enforcement budget. We have shifted all of our other departments' vehicles into the central garage budget. They are the ones that maintain all of our vehicles. So I'm shifting those repair parts from our law enforcement budget over here into central garage to reflect this as our fleet management system. And then you just see, the motor fuel is also that same cost, market cost trend. So that's the increases in central garage. Questions? Seeing
I have
none?
one.
Yep.
On lubrications, you have lubricants, you have no increase. And I know I've seen substantial increases over the past year in that.
Yeah, so while we do recognize the market rate trends and increases, we believe that our current budget, we can absorb that within the current budget, based on what our actual spend history has been to date and where we are projecting going forward. So we feel confident that we can manage that in the existing budget, and we don't feel a need to increase that for market.
Okay.
Okay?
One quick question. You lock in on the fuel prices at $1 more a gallon. If they trend and they go well below that, are we still locked in at that higher price?
We are still locked in at the higher price. So that's one of the, it's a two-edged sword,
Yeah.
right? And many years, we make out like bandits by locking in well in advance and locking in, because they buy on the futures. When we lock in, it's because they've bought our gallons on a futures market. Every once in a while, it goes in the other direction. I will say that fortunately, the vendor that is currently on the state bid list that we've procured with, Dime Oil, they have a really good communication with our finance department as to what they're really seeing for trends, and if they really, they're in this every single day, whether or not they really feel that that's going to come down. And we actually had the conversation with them. Maybe we only lock in half of our usage, and then look halfway through the year and see maybe if we look then to lock in the remaining half, because what if it does substantially go down? They unequivocally said, don't do it. Lock in the full amount now, because it's not going below where you're at right now. Lock it in for the full year. So we took that advice. They have been very honest and forthright with us in all of our interactions. So we decided to lock in the full amount.
Thank you.
Any other questions on central garage?
We talked in the past about a wash bay. So who is responsible to do a washing of the vehicles? Would it be the drivers, or would it be the maintenance people if we're gonna go in that regard?
It's kind of a split. So if we were to put in an actual truck wash bay, an actual wash system, you would have your drivers drive it through. I mean, it's just you drive it through a car wash. It's the same thing, right? So you would have your drivers do that, and our mechanics would likely do it when they're maintaining a vehicle, and if they need to, do an extra wash on it, they would drive it through. Currently, right now, we have one of our bays established that has a water reclamation system, a water catchment system, that they power wash the vehicles inside the building. It works. It gets the bulk of the crud off. However, it's damaging to the building. you're doing water power washing inside of a building. And so it's damaging to the building. They have, curtain areas up to try and contain that. However, overall, you're adding a lot of moisture content inside of the building that would be better housed in a different ventilation type system that would be in a truck wash bay. That is in our capital improvement plan for recommendation to proceed forward with that, and we can go over that project when we get to there.
On that note, do we have any kind of epoxy coating on the floors and the walls in that area so the salt we're washing off isn't deteriorating the concrete?
We do. It is. But again, it's, you're still running into just the added moisture and humidity within the space that, we have essentially brand new overhead garage doors that you can put whatever you want for coating on it. When you're adding in that much humidity, it's still going to, it's going to accelerate deterioration. Any other questions in central garage? Highway maintenance. So I'm going to respectfully request, as we're going through this one, when it comes to the road renewal, you'll have noted that I've given you in your special town council meeting packet for this upcoming week on Tuesday. Matt Doobie, our highway director, he's going to be joining you to do a full presentation on road renewal. And it's really going to center around this proposal, right? So we're proposing in this budget to increase the road renewal budget to 1.6 million. Okay, so that is an increase ask of 791,000. It shows 991,000, but remember, we lowered the ask of fund balance by $200,000, and so that's being reflected up in here, right? So you're going to see that offset further on, in that summary page. But so your net increase is really $791,000, and so that's really to get us to what does it look like to invest that level, the recommended level of investment in a road renewal program to start making headway on our roads. So Matt is planning on going through a very detailed analysis of what are pavement management, what is the life cycle of a road, what are application methods, what life expectancy does that generate and improve our road systems, as well as how far behind are we and where are our current roads, right? So I think it's probably, I know you probably all have a lot of questions around the road renewal proposal, and that's why I wanted Matt to come and give that presentation to the town council. So if, does that make sense to everyone? The other request for equipment non-vehicular, that is the replacement of a trailer. So we have a 2007 equipment trailer. It's a lower gross weight vehicle trailer that we currently have. It's long past its useful life. We're looking to replace it, but with a higher GWI rated vehicle, so that way they have more flexibility on being able to move equipment around without having to bring out the really big heavy equipment for just like, one of our smaller pieces of machinery. They'll be able to move stuff around more flexibly. So that's the $12,800 for that. And again, labor is related to union contract. Any questions on this aside from road renewal, which I know is a ton of questions? Okay. Highway winter maintenance. This is the standard winter maintenance projection. And I will say for year over year, we typically try and keep this fairly flat and fairly stable. It's that long-term plan. None of us know what winter is going to look like next year. And thankfully, the town has established a winter maintenance reserve. So that way, should we have a really bad year, we have a relief valve before we have to go to fund balance and look for a supplemental appropriation, which definitely has provided a value to the town. I will say for the salt and calcium, that one, I am requesting to start moving back that one into more of a historical funding pattern. We had reduced that funding in the current fiscal year because of the amount of salt that we had in our salt shed and because of the level of the reserve balance. We're ending the year right now. I don't know that we'll be able to have as full of a salt shed going into next year as what we've had in the current fiscal year. So I'm looking to just start to make those modifications into showing that more standard level funding for that line item. And also there's increases in costs in salt as well.
I got a question on the overtime. Looking at budgeted and actual going back several years, how is it that you can where the estimate is actually ended up being, or budgeted is actually ending up as the
Yeah.
actual?
It's because we actually transferred the remaining balance of that budget to the winter reserve.
Okay.
Right? So the original budget was the, $115,000. We didn't expend all of that, and so we transferred the remaining balance, and it was shown as a budget transfer as opposed to an expenditure.
Okay. Thank
Make
you.
sense?
Yep.
Because you see the same thing with salt too, further down. Yeah, that's why.
I figured the salt, we just pre-purchased whatever was left in the budget.
Yeah, no.
The budget as of which the estimates are going to be very close to fully expended by the end of the year, just based on how our winter was.
We've had a lot of holiday storms this year. A lot of weekend and holiday storms.
And heavy treatment.
So my question to the chair is, we're about 15 minutes before the hour. Our next department really moves into our recreation and like kind of another division, if you will. Do you want me to continue, or would you prefer to hold and move prep for the Board of Education?
I'd say let's break now. Give us a few minutes before Board of Ed starts their presentation.
So we will pick this piece up on Monday, correct?
Yes. So we're going into a 15-minute recess before the Board of Ed and Superintendent's presentation.